I found it on a Tuesday morning in October, and I stood on that porch step for a long time before I trusted what I was seeing. The shirt was on the ground. Not the way a shirt falls when wind takes it off a nail, not crumpled or turned inside out, not carried 20 feet into the yard the way weather moves things. It was folded, flat and square and deliberate, lying in the grass at the base of the post, the way Della used to fold things when she was setting them aside to put away later. The same fold, panels in, arms tucked under, the collar laid even across the top. I want you to understand something before I go any further, because I know how this sounds. I have spent 64 years on this earth being skeptical of anything I could not measure with a tape or explain with what I know about weather and animals and the ordinary behavior of things. I am the kind of man who does not tell stories like this one. That is the only reason I am telling it. To understand what that folded shirt meant, I have to go back to the beginning of it. Back to the year Della died, and the winter after, and the slow, quiet way 11 acres of hill country can hold a man together and come close to breaking him at the same time. Della Ramsey passed in the first week of March, 2 years before the autumn I'm telling you about. She had been sick for 18 months, the kind of sick that comes on steady and does not reverse. And we knew for most of that time how it was going to end. Knowing does not prepare you. I want to say that plainly because I hear people say it does, and in my experience it does not. It only means you have longer to watch something you cannot stop. She was 61. She had spent the better part of 35 years on this hill with me, and she knew the property the way I knew it, maybe better. She knew where the soil went soft after a rain and where it held firm. She knew which corner of the back fence the deer used in November and which stand of oak dropped first. She had a flannel shirt she wore through every autumn, a red and black wool blend from a small farm store 2 towns over, soft with years of washing. A button missing on the left cuff that she had been meaning to replace for probably the last decade, and never did. We had bought that shirt the same afternoon, both of us on a Saturday in October of 1988, when we had driven over to the farm store for a bag of laying mash for the hens, and Della had stopped at the rack of work flannels by the front door. She had pulled it down off the hanger and held it up against herself and said, "This is the one I will wear until I am old." I had said, "You are not old," and she had said, "I will be, and I will wear this." She paid $11.95 for it, which I remember because she counted the bills out of her wallet onto the counter like she was settling a debt, and she put it on in the parking lot before we drove home. That shirt rode shotgun on a few thousand mornings between that Saturday and the autumn she got sick. It went out into the chicken yard with her at 5 in the morning. It went into the garden in May and out of the garden in October. It hung on the same nail in the mudroom for 33 winters. The cuff button gave up sometime in the early 2000s, and she said she would mend it that weekend and did not. And the loose thread became one of the small things about her I knew without ever needing to look. The fold I'm about to tell you about is the fold she used on that shirt every night of those 33 years. When she died, I kept the shirt. I did not think about why at the time. I put it in the closet with her other things, and for almost a year it stayed there while I went through the business of grief, the way a man goes through work he does not want to do, one task at a time, not looking too far ahead. I drove my mail route through that last spring and summer because the retirement I had been planning felt wrong to pursue without her. And then I retired in September anyway because staying on the route felt worse. Too many people asking how I was doing in that particular tone people use. Too many mornings driving past the same mailboxes she used to ask about. I came home to the 11 acres, and I told myself I would fix things. The fence along the east side needed 3 new posts. The gutter on the woodshed had pulled away from the fascia. There was a list, the way there always is on a property that has been kept by two people and is now kept by one. I worked through it slowly, the way a man does when the work is the thing keeping him upright, rather than the thing he actually wants to accomplish. The first winter was the worst. I do not have a name for what those months were exactly. I got up, I fed Biscuit, I made coffee. I ate what I could manage to put together, and I split wood in the afternoons when the cold was not too bad. And at some point in the evenings, I went to bed. That was the whole of it. I stopped putting 2 cups on the counter sometime around November, and I did not start again. Biscuit was 11 years old that winter, stiff in his back legs by then, but still attentive, still following me room to room the way he had since he was a pup. Beagles are stubborn and particular and not generally known for their emotional depth, but I will tell you that Dog knew something was wrong from the first week, and he did not leave my side for months. He slept at the foot of my chair. He walked with me to the woodpile and waited. He was the reason I got up some mornings, honestly. Not a thing I would have said out loud at the time. The flannel shirt came out of the closet the following December, the second winter. I do not remember deciding to take it down. I remember it was a grey, cold morning, and I was standing in the doorway of the bedroom not doing anything in particular, and I walked to the closet and took the shirt off its hanger and carried it to the porch. I hung it on the post at the top of the porch steps. The post is cedar, 8 inches square at the base, part of the original porch frame Della and I put up the second summer after we bought the place. There is a nail in the post about chest high, where I hang my jacket when I am coming in from outside work. I put her shirt on that nail. I stood there for a minute in the cold, and I did not feel anything in particular. Or I felt something I did not have a word for. Then I went inside and made coffee and went about the day. That became the ritual. Every morning I took the shirt from wherever I had put it the evening before, and I hung it on that post. Every evening at dusk I took it in. It was not a thing I planned, it was not a thing I examined. It was the way grief sometimes settles into a behavior before you understand that the behavior is holding something together. I am aware that to someone looking from the outside it probably looked odd. An old man putting a dead woman's shirt out every morning like a flag. I did not much care what it looked like. My daughter Kira had not been around much since Della passed. That was not entirely her fault, and I'm not going to put it that way. The estrangement, if that is the word, had started while her mother was still sick, the way family fractures sometimes do under that kind of weight. Kira lived 4 hours south and had her own life and her own grief, and we had said things to each other in a bad week about a year before Della died that neither of us had fully come back from. After the funeral, she had come and stayed 3 days and helped me go through some of Della's things, and we had been careful with each other the whole time. That careful, that does not mean things are right. It just means nobody is pushing. She called on my birthday and at Christmas, and I called on her daughter's birthday in April, and in between there was mostly silence. 14 months of it by the time the October I am describing came around. I did not know how to fix that. I had thought about calling her more times than I could count. I would get as far as picking up the phone and then I would put it down. It felt like too much ground to cross with just a voice. I kept telling myself I would get to it when I had something real to say. The days leading up to that 3rd week of October were plain and grey. We had had rain for most of the first 2 weeks of the month, the steady Pacific drizzle that comes in off the hills and parks itself for days at a time. The ground was soft throughout. The leaves were about 3 weeks past their peak, the oak and hickory along the east fence mostly bare, the cedars still dark green, and the grass in the yard had that heavy, wet look it gets when it has been standing in water. I had been working on the fence along the back of the property, replacing a section the rain had heaved, and my back was giving me trouble, and I was tired in the way that is different from the tired that comes after good work. The shirt had been on the post for its usual morning showing on Monday of that week. I am certain of this because I remember taking it in that evening when the rain picked up, folding it over my arm and carrying it inside. What happened on Tuesday is that I woke up later than usual. Biscuit had already been outside and come back in on his own through the dog door, and I made coffee and sat at the table for a long time without doing much of anything. I did not go to the porch. I did not hang the shirt. It was not a decision I made. It was just an absence. Wednesday the same, Thursday the same. On Thursday evening, I noticed the shirt still on its hook inside the door, and I thought I should put it out in the morning, and then I went to bed and forgot. Friday morning, which was the fourth day, I took my coffee to the front door and opened it and stepped out and looked down at the base of the post and stopped. It was not how I left it. I had not set it there. The shirt had been on the hook inside the door. This shirt on the ground at the base of the post was folded. I want to be careful here because I know the first thing a practical man looks for in a situation like this. I looked for wind. There was no wind that morning, and even if there had been, wind does not fold things. It carries them. A shirt in October, wind ends up in the fence line or the middle of the yard, not at the base of the post it had been hanging on 3 days before. Wind does not set the collar even. I looked for Biscuit. He was sitting on the top step, watching me, his tail making one slow sweep across the wood. He was not agitated. He was not barking or crouched low the way he goes when there is something wrong in the yard. He looked the way he looks on a morning when he has already done his business and is waiting for his breakfast, settled and at ease. I went down the steps and crouched next to the shirt. I looked at it for a long minute without touching it. The flannel was damp from the morning dew, but not soaked. The fold lines were pressed flat, clean creases, the kind of fold you make with both hands and a flat surface. Panels in, arms tucked under, collar across the top. The same way Della folded things when she was done with them for the day. I picked it up. It held its shape for a moment before it softened in my hands. I stood there at the base of the post with the shirt against my chest, and I ran through everything I knew about what might have caused this. Someone had come onto the property and done it. I went through this. There were no tire tracks on the lane. The gate to the yard was closed the way I always leave it, latched, not swung wide. No one from town had reason to come out here, and if they had, they would have knocked. The neighbour to my north was an 80-year-old woman who had not been well, and the property to the east was standing empty, sold the previous spring. I did not have the kind of friends who drop by unannounced, and even the ones who used to come around had stopped after the first year, the way they do, an animal. I went through this next. A raccoon might have pulled the shirt off the hook inside if the door had been open, but the door had not been open, and a raccoon does not fold. A deer can move things with its nose, but a deer does not reach that low to the ground and set something flat. I had never seen a deer come into the fenced yard in any case. The gate was the wrong design for deer to push. A very large animal. I sat with that one longer. The impression I had found near the back fence post 11 days before was back in my mind. I had been checking the fence line on a Thursday, moving along the east side where the ground was softest, when I found it about 10 feet from the corner post in the wet earth. A single impression, roughly oval, about 14 inches long and almost 8 inches wide. The heel was deep, and the front was broad. I had stood next to it for a good while, trying to make it into a deer track or a bear track. Bears come through this county occasionally in September and October. But a bear's track is different in a specific way. The claw marks are there, and the heel is relatively narrow compared to the width of the front. This had no claw marks, and the heel was in proportion to the length. It looked like a very large version of a human footprint. I had told myself at the time that my eye had been tricked. The rain had been heavy and the earth was not uniform, and a deer stepping and sliding on wet ground can leave a distorted mark that reads wrong. I had been fairly convinced of this at the time. Standing at the base of the porch post with Della's folded shirt in my hands, I was less convinced. I thought about the branch. There was a hickory on the north side of the fence line, a mature tree that had had a limb come down sometime in the past few weeks. I had noticed it, but not paid it much attention because branches come down in autumn, and the hickory was not a tree I was particularly watching. When I went and looked at it, the day after I found the shirt, which I will get to, I measured the breakpoint on the remaining stub. It was 8 feet off the ground. I have a 6-foot 2-inch reach. I cannot touch 8 feet off the ground without a ladder. That branch had not come down in a wind I could remember from the past month. The break was not a lightning split. It was a mechanical break, the kind where something applied steady pressure, and the wood gave. I am not a person who comes to conclusions easily. My wife used to say I would argue with plain evidence if it inconvenienced my prior beliefs, and she was not wrong. But I stood at that porch post in the grey October morning with the shirt folded against my chest, and I ran out of rational explanations, one by one, the way you run out of pegs when the coat rack is full. Something had been here. Something had been coming close to the fence line, close enough to leave an impression in the soft ground, close enough to bring down a hickory branch at 8 feet. Something had been watching the ritual I had been keeping for almost 2 years without understanding I was keeping it. And something had, in 3 days of the shirt left unattended on the nail, picked it up and folded it and placed it at the base of the post. Not a fold, it learned. A fold, it showed me. The rational piece of me spent the rest of the morning arguing with that sentence. You do not get to 64 years of fixing trucks and walking a mail route through all weathers and maintaining a piece of working land without developing a firm suspicion of anything that cannot be accounted for with known physical cause. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I went over it again. Each time I came back to the same place, the fold. If the shirt had been on the ground and crumpled or blown off the post in a wind I had slept through, or dragged somewhere and left in a heap, I could have found my way to a natural explanation. The fold closed that door. Biscuit came and lay down under the table near my feet, which is what he does when I'm sitting too long in one place, his small way of telling me I should move. I did not move for a long time. It was late in the afternoon, probably around 4:30, when the light was going and the sky to the west was the colour of a bruised plum, that I went back out to the porch. I had brought the shirt with me. I did not hang it. I just stood at the rail with it held against my chest again, looking out at the yard and the fence and the tree line beyond. The tree line was still. And then, over a period I could not have put in minutes because I stopped thinking about time, I became aware that the stillness was specific. Not the ordinary stillness of late October in hill country, when the birds have gone quiet and the deer are standing somewhere, and the air has that particular weight before dark. This was the stillness that happens when something large is stationary in a space where ordinary things would be moving. I have been in the woods long enough to know the difference. It is a felt thing more than a hard thing. Your body knows before your mind does. Biscuit was at my heel. I looked down at him. His head was up, his ears slightly forward, his nose working. His tail was low and easy. He was not afraid. He was paying attention. I looked back at the tree line. About 30 yards out past the fence, at the edge where the cedar thicket met the bare hickories, there was a density that was wrong. Not a shape I could describe cleanly because the light was going and the trunks were close together. But something behind those trunks was not cedar and was not hickory and was not an arrangement of shadow. It was there in the way that large living things are there, the way you can tell the difference between a stone and an animal even at distance when neither is moving. I held still. I am not entirely sure I breathed. It was enormous. That was the first clear thought I had. Not in proportion to what I expected at a tree line. The density of it, the way it occluded the lighter space between the trunks at a height that should have been empty air, was enormous. I could not make out a face or a posture or any detail in the failing light. I could make out scale, and I could make out that it was still. We stayed like that for a while. The light kept going. The sky to the west was darker now, the plum colour gone to a deep grey blue, and the yard was getting dim, and the tree line was getting darker. The thing among the trees did not move. It was not approaching. It was not retreating. It was simply there in the way that something is there when it has decided to be present. I thought about the shirt. I thought about Della's fold. I thought about Biscuit being calm at this fence line for weeks now. Something I had noticed and not registered. His nose going toward the east fence on our morning walks, and his tail staying easy, and me putting it down to a rabbit or a fox trail and not examining it. I thought about what it means when something notices a thing you have been doing alone. My chest did something I had not expected. I am going to try to describe it plainly. The grief I had been carrying for 2 years had settled into a shape I was used to by then. It was not acute anymore. It was structural, part of the architecture of each day, the way a load-bearing wall is part of a house. You do not notice it unless someone moves it. In that moment at the porch rail, something moved it. Not violently, not with any drama. The way a hand moves carefully through water without disturbing it more than necessary. Something came loose in my chest that had been set in place for a long time. I did not cry. I want to be accurate. My eyes went wet, and I stood there in the near dark holding a flannel shirt and feeling the particular ache of being known in a way I had not expected. The presence at the tree line did not announce its departure. At some point, I was aware that the specific quality of the stillness had changed, that the density behind the cedar trunks was not there anymore, and the ordinary sounds of the hillside had returned, the small wind in the remaining leaves, the scratch of a night bird somewhere in the upper branches. Biscuit sat down and yawned, which is what he does when a thing he has been attending to is finished. I stood there another few minutes. Then I went inside. I put the shirt on the table and turned on the kitchen light. The flannel was still slightly damp from the morning dew and the hours of being held against me. I smoothed it out flat and refolded it, following the same creases, panels in, arms tucked, collar across the top. I carried it to Della's chair. Della's chair was a wide-armed wooden rocker she had bought at an estate sale 20 years ago, painted green, the paint worn off the armrests, and the seat from use. I had not sat in it since she died. I had not moved it. I'd walked around it for 2 years the way you walk around something too heavy to carry and too significant to remove. I sat down in it that evening with the shirt in my lap. The chair felt exactly the way I remembered it, feeling when I had watched her sit in it, the slight forward lean, the sound of the rockers on the floorboards. Biscuit came and put his chin on my knee. I sat there for probably 20 minutes without moving. Then I got up and went to the phone. Kira answered on the 4th ring, which told me she was close to the phone but not expecting the call. "Dad," she said, just that. Her voice was careful in the way it always was now, that particular careful. I opened my mouth and it took me a second to get anything out. I'm all right, I said, which was not what I meant to lead with. She waited. I just wanted to hear your voice, I said. I know it's late. There was a pause on her end, longer than a long-distance delay. It's not late, she said. I had about 4 other things lined up that I had been meaning to say for 14 months, and none of them came in the right order. What came out was, I'm sorry I've been quiet. It got to be a habit. Not much of an apology, the worst kind, the kind that explains itself instead of just offering. I knew that as I said it. She was quiet again for a moment. Then she said, Me too, Dad. That was most of it. We talked for about 20 minutes about ordinary things, her daughter's school, a repair she needed done on her car, whether I was eating enough, which she asked the way her mother used to ask it, direct and without preamble. We did not talk about Della. We did not talk about what had been said a few years back. There was too much ground still between us for that, and neither of us was ready for it that night. But the call had been made and she had answered, and we had stayed on the line for 20 minutes, and that was more than I had managed in 14 months. I said goodnight and set the phone down and stood in the kitchen for a while. The hill outside was full dark by then. I could see the porch post from the kitchen window, the cedar pale in the outdoor light I leave on through the night. The nail was bare. The yard was quiet. I went to bed that night, and I slept, which sounds like a small thing and was not. In the days that followed, I went back to each piece of evidence with the part of my mind that needed to finish the accounting. I measured the break on the hickory limb, 7 feet 11 inches from the base of the stub to the ground, which I rounded to 8 feet because I was not going to pretend a single inch changed what I was looking at. I put my arm up at full extension, and my fingertips fell short of that mark by almost 10 inches. I went to the fence line and looked at the impression I had found before, but the rain that came through the following week had softened the edge of it, and by then it was not much more than a depression in the grass. I had not thought to photograph it when I found it, which I consider a failing of imagination on my part. I measured it from memory, 14 inches long, 8 inches wide. I have worn a size 10 shoe for 30 years. Size 10 is about 11 inches. 14 was more than the measurement I could account for with anything I knew about the animals in these hills. I am not going to tell you I have an explanation for what I saw at that tree line. I went through the possibilities the same way I went through everything else. Bad light, depth, the way shadow collects between trunks and builds false shapes at dusk. I have stood at enough tree lines at enough dusks to know what shadow does and does not do. Shadow does not hold still with that quality of intention. It does not make a dog calm with interest. What I settled on in the end is this. Something had been here, moving through this property or the edge of it for at least the weeks I could account for with evidence. Something that noticed a small ritual kept by a man alone on a hill. Something that saw the shirt go unattended for 3 days and did the only thing it could do to restore the order of the morning, which was fold it the way the morning called for it to be folded and place it where it belonged. I do not know how it knew the fold. I have turned that question over more times than I can count. The only answer I come back to is that it had been watching long enough to know what Della's fold looked like, long enough to know the ritual was hers before it was mine. That is not a comfortable thing to think about. It is also not a frightening thing. It sits in a place I do not have a word for, somewhere between grief and gratitude, and I have stopped trying to name it more precisely than that. I called Kira again the following Sunday. That call went a little longer and covered a little more ground. We did not fix everything in 2 phone calls. The fault lines between us ran deeper than a Sunday evening conversation could bridge, and I knew that, and I think she did too. But, she said at the end of the second call, that she was thinking about bringing her daughter up for a few days in November, if I had room. I told her I had plenty of room. I meant it as plainly as I said it. She came the second weekend of November with Della's granddaughter, who was 7 years old and named Maggie, and who had her grandmother's way of going straight at things without a preamble. Maggie spent most of the first afternoon following Biscuit around the yard and asking questions about every tool in the woodshed. And Kira and I drank coffee on the porch and talked around the things we were not ready to say yet, and said a few of the things we were. And by the time they drove away on Sunday afternoon, something had shifted between us that had been locked for a long time. It was not a resolution. It was a door being found. I want to be careful not to say more than I know. I have told this story twice now, once to Kira in pieces over the winter, without all the details, and once here. There are things about it I am confident in and things I am not. I am confident the shirt was folded and that I did not fold it. I am confident the impression near the fence post was not any track I know from 40 years of walking this country. I am confident in the quality of the stillness at that tree line and in what Biscuit's posture told me about the nature of what was there. What I am not confident in is any story I could build around those facts. I have tried a few. None of them hold all the way through. What I am left with is something simpler than a story. I kept a ritual I did not understand for almost 2 years, and something on the edge of this property noticed it, and when I let it slip, it did not let it slip with me. That is all I can say about the nature of the thing. The autumn turned to winter, and the winter was hard in the ordinary ways that a hill country winter is hard. The kind of cold that comes under the door no matter how well you have sealed it, the kind that makes the pipes groan at 3 in the morning. I cut more wood than I needed, partly because I always do, and partly because the work felt good again in a way it had not for a while. I fixed the gutter on the woodshed properly, with the right hardware this time, not the temporary fix I had put on it in the fall when my back was bad. Kira called on my birthday in January and stayed on the phone for an hour. She asked about Biscuit and about the fence work and about whether the pipes had given me trouble, which they had not that winter. And I asked about Maggie and about the car repair and about how her work was going. At the end of the call, she said she loved me, which she had not said out loud in several years. I said it back, which I had not done easily and longer than I want to put a number to. The flannel shirt has been on the post every clear morning since the 4th day of that October, and taken in every evening at dusk. The ritual means something different to me now than it did before. It always meant something I could not name. Now it means that, and one more thing. I do not go to the tree line to look for anything. I do not put food out or make any particular sign. It was not my place to do those things, and I think I knew that without having to decide it. What had happened on its own terms, in its own time, and the only right response I could think of was to keep doing what I had been doing. Keep the morning, keep the ritual, be here in the ordinary way. Some mornings when the air is still and the light comes in at a particular low angle across the frost, Biscuit will sit up on the top step and put his ears forward and look toward the east fence, and his nose will work for a few seconds, and his tail will make one slow sweep, and then he will put his head back down on his paws. He has done this more than once. He has done it enough that I notice it each time. I do not look hard at the tree line when he does this. I look the way you look at something you want to let alone, with the corner of your attention, without pressing. I have learned there is a way of not looking that is still a kind of acknowledgement. The shirt hangs on the post. Biscuit settles on the step. The tree line holds what it holds. I have stopped needing to know what it was. I know what it did, and I know what that cost me to receive, and I know what became possible after. That is more than enough to carry. If you have had a moment like this one, something that does not fit inside what you thought you knew, but that was too specific and too careful to explain away. There is another story on screen right now. I think you will understand it the same way I understood that fold.